Welcome back to Out of the Rough. I'm with Brian Koegle. Brian Koegle is with the law firm of Poole and Shaffery.
That's right.
And very involved in the community.
Very much so.
And your specialty is labor law.
Correct.
In fact, you're a member of the labor and employment section of the California State Bar.
That's correct. We work exclusively from the management perspective.
I want to talk to you. A lot of concerns as an employer myself about labor law and doing it right. I think most employers want to make sure they're doing it right. Not to protect themselves, but to do the right thing for their employees.
Absolutely.
And one of the biggest things that comes across my desk is whether you're an exempt employee, independent contractor versus employee. Let's talk about exempt employee.
Well, employee classification is one of the biggest areas where employers make missteps, and California law isn't necessarily clear in all aspects. In fact,
no.
I know. Well, I joke about it with employers all the time that doing business in the state of California is basically a risk in and of itself because the laws are constantly changing and modifying, and unless you have counsel in your corner or somebody who's whispering in your ear, it's hard to stay ahead of the game. Misclassification has been one of the areas that the courts and the administrative agencies have been clasping down on over the course of the last 10 years, especially when it comes to classification between either independent contractors versus employees or exempt versus non-exempt. So a lot of employers look at this and they say, well, you know what, we want to put this person in an independent contractor role, and my statement to them is this: remember that in the state of California, the presumption is that you're dealing with an employee that is doing work for you. If you're able to take them out of the box of employment and put them into the box of independent contractor by meeting a 14-point test, that's the only way that you're able to classify that person as
14-point test.
14 points. 11 points set forth by the IRS, 3 more added by California state courts over the course of the last 7 years.
Oh, exciting.
It is.
That's why unfortunately, that's why we need lawyers.
That's very much so. And then even if they aren't independent contractors and you've got employees, many people believe that just because you've got an employee and you call them salaried, that you don't have to pay them overtime. And that's not the case, because the presumption, again, is that all employees who are performing work in the state of California are entitled to receive overtime pay for all hours worked in excess of 8 in a day or 40 in a week. And that's or 40 in a week. And far too many employers look at it and they say, well, my employee is salaried, so they don't get paid overtime. My statement to them is, unless they classify and unless they are properly classified in one of the 6 primary exemption categories, the employee should be paid overtime for all the work that they do.
For example, an exempt category, somebody may be managing.
Correct. 2
or more. What's the ballpark?
The executive management exemption requires an employee to be managing 2 or more individuals. They must be spending 50% or more of their time doing the management of the business. In other words, if you're in a widget factory, they're spending more than 50% of their time telling people what they need to do, directing people, giving assignments, rather than making widgets.
Making that particular product.
Exactly.
Yes,
and they have to have independent discretion, control. They can make decisions on their own without having to run it up the ladder. Those are all elements of the duties test of that exemption.
Now, again, coming from the perspective of most employers, in my opinion, really want to do the right thing, especially employers here in the Santa Clarita Valley. Do it right and get your advice to do it right. Let's talk about basic wages, overtime, meals, that kind of area, that gray area that, that many are playing in.
Right. And I agree that most employers do want to comply with the law. The problem is they just aren't educated on it. So kind of the 101 of overtime. If you've got an employee that is non-exempt and they're working more than 8 hours in a day, you have to compensate them at time and a half. If they're working more than 12 hours in that same day, you have to compensate them at double time. If they're working more than 40 hours in a week, you also have to compensate them at time and a half.
It's a lot. I'm adding it up here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then don't forget about the fact that meal and rest periods come into play. If you've got a non-exempt employee, the presumption is that someone who's working a standard 8-hour day is entitled to a 30-minute off-the-clock meal period where they're uninterrupted in their duties. In other words, you're not going to be giving them assignments while they're sitting in your lunchroom.
And the biggest challenge with that is a lot of employees want to just continue to work.
Absolutely.
And I mean, they say, hey, you know, Fred, can I work through lunch? Because I want to get home a little bit early to go see my son or daughter's soccer practice or game or baseball, whatever that is.
Or maybe they're just diligent employees and they say, you know what, we've got to get this project out, Fred. And your job as an employer is to say, employee, I appreciate your diligence. I appreciate your dedication to the company, but we have laws that we have to follow. We have rules. This is one of those rules. I need you to take your lunch period. Thank you, though, for your diligence.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that they're taking those time breaks. Now, there's a case before the California Supreme Court that we're hoping that it's going to come down any day now, although I've been saying this now for 3 years.
So that we can help clarify.
That'll clarify the meal and rest period issue as to whether or not an employer basically has to act as a babysitter. Do they have to ensure that their employees are taking meal and rest breaks, or must they simply provide an opportunity for that employee to take his or her meal and rest breaks without standing in their way, without impeding them? The lower courts have all sided on the side of, look, employers, we don't want you to be a babysitter. If you've given them a chance and you're not standing in their way, and the employee then doesn't take his or her meal and rest periods, that's not your fault. We're not going to hold you liable.
Yeah, that's good, because most employers want to accommodate that employee.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. One last thing I want to touch upon, travel time.
Travel time. This is one of the biggest areas that is misconstrued by many employers. If you've got an employee who is traveling for business and they're under your control, under your direction, that time is compensable under the law. Now, this doesn't include commute time. So if you've got somebody who's driving, say, from Santa Clarita to downtown Los Angeles as part of their job in the mornings, and they're driving an hour and a half, that time is not compensable. But if you've got somebody who's assigned in Santa Clarita and they have to go to a job site in Long Beach, and they'd normally only have a 5-minute commute here within the Santa Clarita Valley, you have to pay them for all of the time that they're going to travel to Long Beach and back from Long Beach. Now, what a lot of employers don't know is that that time can be compensated at a rate different than what the employee's regular rate of pay is.
At a reduced rate.
Exactly. So in other words, if you've got an employee who you're paying $15 or $20 an hour on, if they're traveling, you can pay that employee a lesser rate than their normal hourly rate, so long as you satisfy the state minimum wage of $8 per hour for every hour that they're working. So you basically pay them $8 an hour for their travel time, at least, and then you pay them the regular rate for the hours that they're performing their actual functions. But I want to remind employers, especially those that have employees that travel long distances, beware of the fact that overtime will start accruing at the 8th hour of any given day, and depending on the services that are being rendered by that employee, it may be at the $8 an hour rate while they're driving home, or their regular rate of pay.
Okay. Important to understand what you've got.
Absolutely.
Very important, and I appreciate all that your partner John Shaffery's done for the community. He was formerly the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce.
Absolutely,
I have a ton of respect for him in that role, and since this is Out of the Rough Chamber Edition, I really appreciate what he's done. So let him know that. Brian Koegle, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for having me.
Poole and Shaffery, great, good stuff. Real quickly, website?
Yeah, www.pooleshaffery, POOLESHAFFERY.com.
Perfect, good stuff. Thank you very
much.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Out of the Rough. If you'd like to watch this online, go to scvtv.com or fredarnold.com. If you would like to shoot me a message and ask me a question for one of my guests or recommend a guest, email me fred@fredarnold.com. Until we talk again, make it a great day.